We've seen time and time again on so many boards, both here in the United Kingdom and abroad, where CEDAs make an enormous impact and difference. And it's something that we at the IoD are immensely proud of, to be the only organization in the world that is able to make this award, and to be able to accredit people with the highest standard of accreditation for directors. And I'm immensely proud myself to be on the journey, and I'm looking forward to, in time, achieving the same status as you have, because it's important that we also are all on the journey of lifelong learning. So I'm really pleased that we're all able to come together today. We've got an amazing array of speakers and panelists and breakout sessions, and just want to really pay tribute to the team led by Emma Hicks, who I know most of you, if not all of you, will know. But she's supported behind the scenes by a brilliant team who have moved all of our programs online virtually. We were, as every organization in the world has been, struck by the pandemic very seriously. We, under Emma's leadership, pivoted to virtual within literally a few days, and certainly in a few weeks after the pandemic started, we were able to start to deliver all our courses virtually, and I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of the team for doing that. Enough from me, except to say, really hope you enjoy today. Please use the chat function. Please give us feedback as we go through. I know that the speakers are also excited by the opportunity to have the discussion, the debate. And Emma, back to you, but thank you very much indeed for allowing me the opportunity to welcome everybody here today.
Thank you very much, John. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. As John said, my name's Emma Hicks, Head of Professional Development at the IoD. And it really is my honour to be your host for today's summit, which celebrates 21 years of Chartered Director. As John said, we have a jam-packed event. We have two amazing panels, a keynote presentation from our former chair, Charlotte Valeur, interactive breakout sessions, and of course, the chance for you to put your questions to our speakers and get involved in the discussions. We will also be announcing the winner of our Chartered Director of the Year Award 2020. As John said, please do post questions in the main chat, and if you want them directed at a particular speaker, please do state this on your question. If you have any technical issues during today's summit, do reach out to our wonderful team who are working behind the scenes. There are IoD producers and they will assist you. You can actually do this by sending them a private message, so do so to any of the participants labelled IoD team. Please note that the summit is being recorded so we can share the wonderful outputs from today with other members who couldn't join us live. And at the end of today's summit, we will be asking you to complete an online feedback form. The link for this will be posted in the main chat. We'd be very grateful for your views, and we'll use your feedback to inform our planning for future events and CPD programs. And please note that today's summit is actually accredited IoD CPD, and you can request a digital certificate on your feedback form. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Natalie Sykes, who's our Head of English Regions, and she will be moderating our first panel on the green recovery. So Natalie, over to you and our amazing panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and good afternoon, everybody. So our panel is about the green recovery, and we have an esteemed panel. And the first thing we're going to do is start by just going to each and every one, starting with Ian Dormer, who is our former, not just regional chair for the North East, but former chair of the main IoD board. Ian, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on board today. My name's Ian Dormer. I've got an engineering contracting business based out of Newcastle, or just south of the river in Newcastle, and we specialise in the heavy industry. We work mostly for the electricity companies, the power stations, and big process industries. So I'm very much in the welding, the electricians, and that's my world. And often, sometimes fingers point at us saying that we're part of the pollution and part of the problem. So it's going to be an interesting discussion today.
Thank you ever so much. And then on to Mario Thomas, with us from Amazon.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm Mario Thomas, and I'm the Head of Experience-Based Acceleration in Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Amazon Web Services. You may have heard of Amazon from watching your favorite Prime TV series or taking delivery of your latest order from our website. But I wanted to draw attention to the things we're doing around the green agenda, which is the topic of conversation today, and how we're building a sustainable business for our customers and the planet. So in 2019, we co-founded the Climate Pledge and made a commitment to be net zero carbon across our business by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. And in my work, we're not just enabling sustainable businesses for Amazon, but we're also doing it for our customers too. So in my role, I work with customers across the world to help them drive new ways to become operationally efficient and reduce waste, and drive the green agenda onto the awareness of boards and using technology like Amazon Web Services to make those things happen in the organization. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And now on to Joanne. So Joanne is from our Regen Future Capital.
Hi everyone, great to be here with all of you and be able to participate. At Regen Future Capital, we are developing ESG compliant investment opportunities that deliver structural impact and positive returns to all stakeholders, which means our purpose has been developed to rebuild harmony between humanity and nature and provide a cleaner and better future for generations. My background really is in finance, internal and external audit, manufacturing, but I'm here to help everybody understand what we have to deliver in this decade of action.
Thank you ever so much. And not but last but definitely not least, Paul, over to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon all. My name is Paul Bennett. I'm an engineer by profession, but I'm also a Chartered Director. I'm Managing Director of an energy and carbon consultancy called BSAC. Currently working in a lot in compliance, an awful lot in strategy, so that's a good topic, an awful lot in learning and development actually at the moment in this sort of green recovery space. Just as an opening, I would say that, that this is not a new thing, the green recovery. It's being used following COVID, but, this is quite a mature sector. So I'm quite excited about sharing some insights and particularly getting chartered directors motivated and excited about strategy in this area. So that'll be an outcome I would like from today. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll start now with that all important word, sustainability. What does it actually mean? And Joanne, I'm going to direct that question to you, if I may. Joanne, I think you may be muted.
Oh, I'm muted, that's, you see, always on Zoom. So this year marks the start of the decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 that were developed by the UN by 2030. But what does that actually mean to businesses and to chartered directors? And I think Natalie, do we have a poll at this point?
We do, yes, there should be a poll coming up. We will have 2 polls during this session, and here is your first one. So it's for all of you. Is green recovery, and Paul mentioned it has actually been around for some time, but is it already on your agenda? So if you wouldn't mind just hitting the button, and then we can feed that back into the panel. We're about halfway there. So Joanne, whilst we're waiting for that poll to come through, in your view, has COVID pushed the green recovery down the agenda?
Well, let me answer that with something that I've just recently read from the Secretary General of the United Nations. And forgive me for reading this out because I want to go make sure that we all get it in our minds. So he stated that everything that we do during and after this crisis must be with a strong focus on building more equal, inclusive and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient in the face of pandemics, climate change and many other global challenges we face. So what he's saying is, let's use this and move forward, in my opinion. Let's build on where we are and use this as a springboard forward. So whilst it may be that we have less resources amongst ourselves to bring it to the top of the board and action, actually this is probably the best time to do that. it's the pivotal time that we can move forward. And also on that, there was a recent development goals report, and it said that there was insufficient and uneven development of goals. Although there was good progress in expanding access to electricity, improving maternal and child health, and increasing women's representation in government. But this was far outstripped by growing food insecurity, deterioration of the natural environment, and persistent and pervasive inequalities. Again, what can we draw from that? How can we go forward? What can we do to push that up the agenda and at this time? So let's have a look at the poll then, Natalie. This is quite interesting, the result
yes.
there.
So hopefully everybody can see this. Interestingly, you know, almost half of those who have contributed have said it's all of the above. So it's everything: the social, economic, ethical values, cost reduction, business ops, compliance, and I think, you know, when you then break it down, social, ethical values is top by far, followed by business opportunities. And what is interesting, and I'm pretty certain that the rest of the panel will be look at how we can address that. It's not a main priority to a fair amount. So Joanne, just looking at that, where does that sit in terms of the agenda?
I think to not have it as a main priority is a mistake. I think nobody can close our eyes to what the situation is and how we're going to move forward. It may not be a priority, but it needs to move up your list, and it needs to be rapid up the list. I think businesses and business owners are now more aware of what the impact is of the small actions that they can do, because it seems overwhelming at times, the whole of the picture of what can I do, what can my business do to move things forward. So if you take away that overwhelmingness and think, what are the small steps that even me personally I can do, or as a business or as a group, what can we do to move it forward? So to me, that's a mistake, because it's unavoidable. Action is unavoidable. This must be something that the board leads by example, to develop your strategy, refresh your strategy, and do some of those small things that have really, in the past, maybe cost reductions. And I know Ian's got an example of what his business has been doing on that. Ian, if you want to mention there.
Yeah, I was going to come in actually on 2 or 3 things on this. First, I'm finding the poll fascinating. One of the advantages of getting old is that you've been through various iterations of what's high on the priority on board agendas. And I roll back 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when all of a sudden this thing called health and safety appeared. And I'm very much sort of linked into the construction industry. We had a dreadful record of killing people or seriously injuring people in and around new sites and construction sites. So then it became top priority on the board agenda. And we had to go through huge iterations of getting people to do simple things like wear hard hats, wearing appropriate safety footwear. These were major movements. Now, it is on the board agenda, of course, but it's not that new wave of information coming through. Now, we don't have to remind people to wear safety equipment, to wear their personal protective equipment. It's there. And now I see the whole of the you might say the green agenda is front and center, but there are going to be some people going to be further up that route than others. And I think one thing that boards have got to ask themselves at this time is, do you want to be behind the curve, or do you want to be ahead of the curve? And if you want to be ahead of the curve, there are great opportunities where you can actually start setting the pace, doing it so that you can work with it, so that you can make a profit out of it. But also you can be seen to be doing the right thing. And just like why did we change our position in health and safety, is because it was the wrong thing to do to allow people to get hurt at work. It was the wrong thing to allow people to actually die. And equally though, it became that it cost a lot of money if you had somebody that was either sick or injured at work. So it was good for even just plain and simple business reasons. And I think that's this sort of agenda we've got to get it forward now. It's the right thing to do, is to adopt and really run with the green agenda. But you can also save money. And I won't take any more of the floor, let others do it, but we're in the process of putting in some innovations that are environmentally friendly, that we actually think we can actually make a much better margin on than we could with our old-fashioned ways.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, and I think we do appreciate that agendas have completely changed. We've seen it ourselves with the Institute in terms of priorities, given the impact of the pandemic. But coming on to the drivers, you know, what are the drivers that we can see to really foster that need to take action and to help us take action? And Paul, I'd like to come to you for that, please, if I may.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, just picking up on Ian's point before I get into the drivers, you know, there are some seismic, as you'll see, opportunities, you know, in this space, and there have been for a while, but they're certainly maturing right now. So I've seen some comments flashing up on the screen already about people saying, you know, should we be considering this? We're in a pandemic, you know, businesses on a cliff, this sort of thing. So it really is a strategic opportunity to really reevaluate what your business is doing and what it could be doing in this space, because it is a huge industry. So if we kick off with compliance, you know, as a driver, you know, what does that mean? We talk about the Climate Change Act, and for those of you who are not so familiar, the government has set a target to be net zero by 2050. So what that means on the ground is no more dirty power stations, no more use of natural gas, no more petrol, no more diesel, no more standard ships, and no more standard planes. So that is completely reinventing the environment around us. And it also means what's left around us needs to be overhauled and refurbished. So that's absolutely everything we see, do and touch. So this really is quite huge. And you will have heard Boris's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And you may think green industrial revolution, you know, so what? But it really is huge when you think about some of the issues I just talked about. And just to gloss over that 10-point plan, we're talking about massive number of offshore wind turbines generating 40 gigawatts of electricity. That's almost the whole of the country, pretty much. 60,000 jobs created there. There's an emerging work stream, if you like, in hydrogen, trying to use hydrogen to replace natural gas, looking at using that as a fuel for other forms of transport, as well as burning it for fuels, as well as ammonia and a few others. So emerging technologies. Nuclear is still in the mix there. You know, an industry that has been parked almost and abandoned, lost its skills, you know, coming back again. We've got the rise of the electric vehicles, and I'm sure you'd have heard on the news, you know, the internal combustion engine is being outlawed in 2030. You know, so everything we see on the road eventually will disappear and be changed. That'll have knock-on effects on transport. Obviously, jets and maritime has the effect. Buildings, that's part of Boris's plan in terms of major refurbishments and technology being added in. Carbon capture, again, another area of innovation for people to get involved in. Nature, replanting of trees and forests, you know, a lot of work there. And most interestingly is the repositioning of the City of London as the global centre of green finance. So just in terms of a couple of other bits of legislation that have come through, those of you who are, you know, in excess of 50 million euro turnover will know about schemes like ESOS, which is the Energy Savings and Opportunities Scheme. And those of you who are just around about turnover 36 million, you'll be understanding what streamlined energy and carbon reporting is. And these are mandatory reports that you must put in your company accounts. So we're seeing this green agenda go right on to, I was going to say the balance sheet, but almost, you know, to give an account of what you're doing. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realise that this sort of thinking is going to come down through all businesses. So, you know, it's happening at that level. But what really excites me, and I'm hoping will excite you listening, and perhaps some of those who are thinking, what next, is just take a strategic back step, look at your business and think about this market we're in and some of the market sizes. So offshore wind, there's going to be 40 billion invested in that space alone. So that's not just the turbines, that's the whole infrastructure, going in even to use Ian's example of providing health and safety equipment for those people, training them, upskilling them. Decarbonised heat is going to be 18 billion. Smart grids, the national grid, 13 billion a year. Electric vehicles, 5.4 billion. There's currently right now a Green Homes grant, and that's 2 billion spend in the next 12 months. And public sector spending $1 billion in the next 12 months in their buildings. And this is just the start of the levels of investment. So you can see why government's doing it. My final point is, this is about business efficiency. The cost of energy is going up 15%. There's opportunities to reduce how much energy you use in your business through technology and through best practice. So, you know, just be aware of that you can invest, you know, to save. And it's not unheard of to see return, you know, to see your overhead in energy reduced by 20 to 40%. So don't forget about that side of business efficiency. There's the opportunity on the one hand, on the other hand is reducing the overhead. So those are the key drivers as I see it. I hope I've, say again, motivated you to think about that strategically.
Thank you, Paul. And at this point, I'd like to bring Mario in from a technology perspective and the technology drivers we can look at.
Yeah, I think that I think the really interesting thing about my job is that I get to work with customers of all sorts of sizes and in all industries, and they all have a desire to make improvements in their organizations, and they're typically doing that through adopting the cloud. So then they're moving what were traditional processes and traditional activities in the organization into the cloud, because it's seen as actually initially a way to cut costs in an organization and make an organization leaner from a balance sheet perspective. But what we're finding in our long-term conversations with customers is that they want to have access to the same sort of things that we're doing for Amazon and in their own business. So when we think about the kinds of projects we have 91 renewable energy projects across the globe today, well, as of June 2020, generating over 2,900 megawatts and delivering 7.6 million of megawatt hours of energy annually. So that's enough to power more than 680,000 US homes. We also have 31 utility scale solar and wind projects and 60 on-site solar systems. And being able to do those things at scale is something that very few organizations can do, but it's something that we are able to share. So with that work going on at Amazon, we're able to make access to that available to our customers through Amazon Web Services. And what we're finding is customers are starting to see benefits beyond those initial cost savings. So they're starting to see their organizations becoming more agile, being able to respond more quickly to disruptors coming into their market. They're being able to be more resilient. They're being able to respond to events like COVID more quickly. So being able to set up a 20,000 person call center to work remotely, so increasing employee mobility is really, really easy to do. And what we found is that those customers are taking those increases in mobility as a way to also increase their sustainability for their organizations as well. We found that organizations, and this is a bit of research by 451 Research, organizations that are adopting the cloud, adopting high technology and moving away from doing this sort of thing themselves, are seeing reductions in their carbon footprints of around 72%. So there are some really interesting low-hanging fruit that our customers can have immediate access to start to drive that green agenda onto the awareness of boards. It's not just a case of you know, we have to suddenly transform the entire organization to become sustainable. It can be done very quickly and through very targeted use of new technologies in the organization. And what it leads quite nicely onto as well is a change in the way the organization works from a people perspective. So we found that our customers are able to take people that were doing lots of very undifferentiated heavy lifting, sort of day-to-day work like running data centers, and they're now able to take part in innovation and in growing an organization and increasing revenues and entering new markets. So people are actually being upskilled to do new things because of this move to a more sustainable way of working through the cloud.
Thank you. And it's been spoken about way before we entered into the pandemic. AI and the impact on today's jobs is clearly going to impact tomorrow's jobs. You know, what can we do to, as you've just touched on the upskilling, to ensure that we don't find ourselves with huge redundant functions? What are the new jobs, and how do we help to transition?
Yeah, I always find this one a really interesting one, and I go back to a LinkedIn meme that I saw several years ago, and I'm sure everybody on the line has heard this sort of quick meme. But basically, a CIO goes to the CEO and says, "What if we train everybody and they leave?" And the CEO responds and says, "Well, what if we don't and they stay?" And what's really interesting is that we're in this sort of world where technology is not going to slow down. Quite the opposite. I think even in the last five and a half years that I've been just running in Amazon Web Services, and 5 years prior to that, I worked in the tech industry as well, and for many years before that, technology has just accelerated, and AI and big data and blockchain, all those things are going to keep coming to us. And what we need to do is take people doing that undifferentiated heavy lifting, and we need to retrain them in the skills that we are lacking. And we need data scientists, we need data mapping specialists, we need solutions architects and business analysts and logistics coordinators, and a whole raft of roles that today need people to retrain and be redeployed. And one of the things that we've done at Amazon is we announced last year in July a $700 million fund to upskill 100,000 of our employees in the US, where we're going to take people who are doing roles in Amazon today, and we're going to train them in new areas like data science and big data and jobs really that are going to be in demand tomorrow. So I think it's incumbent on us all as chartered directors, as board directors, as employers, to really upskill our workforce and allow it to do new things, either for us or if not for us, allow people to move on and do bigger things with their roles. And I think that's the sort of social aspect of what we're doing here. The retraining of people doesn't necessarily mean they have to stay in the organization.
Thank you. And I mean, you mentioned something there around blockchain, and Joanne, would you like to just come in on blockchain? And it's something which we're seeing now, you know, heavily spoken about in the banking sector, for example, the digital economy, the Great Reset. So just if you would like to just give us an insight into blockchain technology.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And I'd like to just pick up on something you mentioned there, Mario, about what you're doing for upskilling, etc. So, you know, you've got to look the whole ethical supply chain. So your duties are going the whole way down the train. So you've got retraining maybe in the fields or maybe in the manufacture of garments overseas, and your duties still go that far. And you know, you've got to retrain at that level as well. And in terms of that, there's a lot of opportunities with blockchain, understanding how to then capture carbon credits, to get them transparent, traceable through the system, and using people who are overseas growing, maybe the mangoes. I mentioned to Natalie, she smiled when I said you can track a mango through blockchain to the supermarket and to your consumption. So, you know, how do you do that? People have got to work differently in all of the locations along the supply chain. And it's very important that you just understand that trace and trackability is going to really enhance that carbon credit market. It's going to make it secure. It's at the moment, there's a lot of different competing carbon exchanges where you can buy and sell and possibly the same carbon credit. There's no controls to any degree that we are used to as chartered directors, and in our normal business life. So retraining through there, you've still got modern slavery for compliance, picking up on something Paul said about compliance. You've got modern slavery, you've got the Bribery Act, you've got all of those things that we know and love that you still have to be compliant with, even through all of this innovation and fast-paced change that we're seeing to get things on the agenda. So when you think about it on the board, think about how you are going to put that compliance statement together. How are you going to actually explain what's happening in the business in the other locations in your supply chain? But upskilling through the technology, we're also exploring using blockchain to monitor trees in the Amazon, to ensure that the conservation is working there, to cut against illegal logging and things like that. So, you know, drone technology as well there, we haven't even touched on that, Mario, you know, to see what is going on in those communities where they are conserving areas of the Amazon, for example, to help with the whole carbon credit market. So a lot of retraining of everybody through the supply chain.
Thank you. And we have a 5-minute warning here, so I can't believe how quickly we've gone through this. So Ian, this is over to you. As I think we've seen and we've identified, you know, many businesses just will not have a strategy for this. What would be a starting point for them to get sustainability on the board agenda?
I think you've got to pick the low-hanging fruits. There's going to be certain areas within your business that are very easy to start with. One of the biggest problems I think we all face is changing that culture, because you have to change the culture of an organization to think that way. How can we improve? How can we do better with this agenda item? So that take the easy, the low-hanging fruit. Once people start realizing there are real benefits, then you can start moving on to the more challenging aspects. That's how I would approach it.
Thank you. And then Paul, over to you with this. You know, practical tip, takeaway to drive this agenda.
Sure. I think, as Ian says, you need to understand your own organisation, your own footprint, if you like. So I would say, you know, and that's what happens if you call in an audit. Someone will do a carbon footprint. They will look at your energy, they will look at your waste, they will look at your water, they will look at logistics, transport, and they will, you know, turn it into a number. They will turn it into a value of money. They will turn it into carbon and energy. And it's what you immediately control is the easiest place to start. You can then start to look at wider issues such as your supply chains, which are more complicated, but you can influence those. But in terms of, there's two sides to this, because there's obviously a big market going on at the moment. And from a strategic point of view is where can you engage in that market as a business? And then internally as a business, you know, how can you be more efficient, more environmentally sensitive and more environmentally aware? So there's two sides to this coin, if you like. And I wouldn't like either one to be forgotten. But the upside's obviously it's a market. If you're able to tap into that, there's additional revenues. And the other side is if you're able to drive efficiency in the business, you're going to reduce your overhead. So I'd look at it, I'd monetize it, to be quite frank, because if you monetize it, that is going to be the most impactful way.
Brilliant, thank you. And round to Joanne, please. We do have another poll as well, which I'm just going to ask to be populated now, as it just takes a little bit of time for us to pull in the votes. So here we go. So it's net carbon. So will your business be net carbon by 2050? So whilst they're coming through, Joanne, round to you, please.
I think you've got to consider people, planet and profit. The three are in, I call it the infinity loop in our business. So you've got your profit generating part of the business, and you've got to think how you can support those areas which are, you know, on, well, they're not going to survive. Some of these ecosystems, some of these things are not going to survive unless we divert some of our profit to do that. And the way that we could do it is by cost reduction, by looking at our business processes, And so personally, I think you've got the small steps, as Ian says, but you've got to look at each one of the goals from the UN. Look what's important to your business and how that's important to the people in your business and the business itself. And that way you're going to ensure some longevity into where the business is going. But also you've got to consider the health and well-being of the people, because the people are what your capital is. Are they driving your business? And if you don't get that excitement from the board downwards into those people buying in to where you're going and your strategy, then it's not going to work.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mario, over to you.
Yeah, I think first thing I'll say is it's an encouraging survey, isn't it? So 41% of people are saying they'll be net carbon neutral by 2030, which is great. So that's a good figure. I think from my perspective, I think it's that top-down approach. I think there has to be leadership for this to work. You can't expect change of that magnitude to happen in a bottom-up approach in the organisation. And I see this every day when I work. Without executive sponsorship, without a leader that's willing to say this is how we're going to move forward as an organisation and as a culture, because organisations are a culture, the change won't happen. So there has to be a top-down buy-in from the board, but there also has to be an upsell to the board to explain to them why it's worthwhile doing this. So I think that being able to demonstrate a pound value for getting the green agenda progress with the board, I think is a great way of driving the message home. And I think the final thing I'd say is, just simply that don't just wave things through. It's very, very easy in an audit. If you do an annual accounts audit or you do an annual PCI audit or whatever the audit happens to be, it's very easy just to wave that through and say, yeah, we did it, and we'll wait till next year's audit comes around again. I think that the board has to take an active part and be a participant in the governance that goes on around the green agenda. It's not enough now to say we've ticked the box every 12 months. It has to be something that lives and breathes within the day-to-day DNA of the organisation. I think that's a given now. Oh, Natalie, we've lost you.
The world famous mute. I hope you're all good at miming. We have concluded our panel topics, and we're now going to move into the questions from our delegates. So if I may start with the first question, which is, just disappeared. Hold on, one moment, I'm not sure what happened there. Many initiatives and funding are spent on break-fix downstream actions. What upstream initiatives can we implement in this space that prevents the downstream issues in the first place? Paul, we'll take that to you first, if we may.
It's a very good question and a very difficult one to answer. But I'll try and answer it in where I sit in my understanding, because there's going to be various takes on this. But in terms of, and I've seen some of the comments come up about use less, how do we address this agenda? But fundamentally, the green revolution from where I am is about energy and fuel. And what we are doing in terms of, as upstream as I'd look at it, is in terms of, we're only using clean and renewable energies which are sustainable, and only developing those markets around them. And then I would think of the downstream being more about spending money on assets and the things that we have around us, and getting rid of internal combustion engines and buying electric vehicles, and what the stress, if you like, that has on the environment in terms of we need more materials, we need to extract more, and where is the balance in this? So I don't know if I've answered your question as you'd have liked, but that's kind of the way I'm looking at it at the moment, is what are we doing for our fuels which power our economy? We were part of the industrial revolution, and now we're coming into this kind of green industrial revolution, and what does that look like? But it certainly means we are going to be using, we're creating those huge wind turbines, which is a lot of metal in sea, concrete pilings and all the rest of it. So it's a complex one for sure.
Natalie, can I come in on this one, please? Because I think, I'm glad you explained upstream, downstream, Paul. I come from a slightly different perspective on this, in as much as that as soon as we put something on the agenda, innovation will follow. Now, be it Mario you might say the digital sphere, but my industry has been pushed towards more environmentally friendly processes. But if I haven't got those resources to apply, then I can't do it. But we were approached by a manufacturer of a water-based paint that will dry down to 6 degrees Celsius. Now, in our world, that doesn't happen. Water-based paints need 20 degrees Celsius. They need controlled environments. We were suddenly given an innovation that is volatile organic compound free, it's environmentally friendly, and will work. So that innovation is now being put into our industry through my company, and we're suddenly making huge leaps and bounds. Now, those sort of processes, those sort of changes are something that, of course, as I came back to my previous answer, we have to change the culture. People then have to say, oh, it's new, will it work? And then there's all those doubters. So I think we've got a big picture issue in terms of changing behavior, but equally I think there are people out there, and this is where the business opportunity comes, that are trying to innovate to improve our impact.
Natalie, you're on mute.
Practicing your miming skills. Joanne, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I think you've got to consider the whole circular economy. So, whether it's upstream, downstream, to me, it's in a circle. So, whatever action you're doing, you've got a reaction somewhere else, and tackling some of the start processes. So, which is maybe for me, I come from a different angle at the moment as well, which is regenerative agriculture, for example. It's taking some time to move people from intensive, using a lot of fertilizers, using practices which actually strip so many nutrients out of the ground. Something actually I studied when I was back at school, and that was quite a few years ago now. The same process is still here, and we haven't made any progress on it. But taking that to a level where you're in regenerative agriculture takes a little bit of time, but once you're there, that is self-perpetuating in the ecosystem. So you've got to actually think about how those original things start, and how then you're going to have a better food chain. So for me, it's not just about, I'd say, the energy consumption, energy usage. It's about the whole of the ecosystems. But interestingly, there's an issue at the moment with recycling solar panels. So solar's been really big, but nobody really thought about what we were going to do with the solar panels. Wind turbines you mentioned. At the moment, there's a lot of bird deaths on the turbines because they're silver. Now, black coating reduces those deaths by a long shot. So there's other things that happen then, and then you're reviving the ecosystem as well. So for me, sustainability isn't just about what we're doing on the green agenda, or potentially greenwashing, as some people are doing. It's about what are you doing for all of those goals in all of the world, not just our world as well.
Thank you. And we have had a point, really, rather than a question, which is around, as leaders, we also need to walk the talk. What are we doing personally to contribute? But just picking up on one question here, which is around nuclear and whether it should really be included in the green agenda. The follow-up point to this is, although it does not produce CO2, a recent report suggested that the land contaminated by a minor leak in Scotland won't be usable for 700 years. Paul? No? Joanne? Yes?
I was in a business which was groundwater reclamation and doing cleanups from the last industrial revolution, mostly based in the US. And some of those cleanups were in the hundreds or thousands of years cleanup. So it's a big thing that we've got a legacy to do that, and that land won't be usable for such a long time. And what's interesting is once you've cleaned it up, maybe the water plume moves, and then you've got to clean it up somewhere else as well. So, it's a movable beast as well. So it was just a comment to to say there, Natalie. Sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, certainly nuclear is not welcome by anybody. It is a legacy issue. The trouble we've got with nuclear is it creates relatively clean from a carbon perspective and cheap, very reliable, very controllable form of electricity, which acts as a base load for our national grid. That's the legacy. It has the horrible side, you know, in terms of the radioactivity, the cleanup, the risk. And we've seen, you know, many countries have just turned their back on nuclear altogether. And up until, you know, literally last week, my guess would have been we would have been phasing out nuclear, but that's not the case. I think we've got, you know, that in the mix for the UK. So no, it is a problem. I think in terms of innovation and where we're going is the question is how can we get ourselves off nuclear fuel. You can't do it through wind, you can't do it through solar, you can do so much on energy storage and batteries, but the legacy we've got with the national grid is it needs this big, thermally massive, inertia heavy form of generation. So there lies the challenge is that we need to overcome that. And there are things like synthetic inertia being looked at on the innovation side. But it is a challenge and it is very unwanted.
Thank you. And we just touched on it before about walking the talk, but should carbon offset be banned if it doesn't actually change behaviours? And I've seen a few other comments around cultural change here. So, for example, plant a tree but keep flying around the world. Mario, your thoughts on that, please?
I think it's really difficult to change people's behaviour en masse, as we've seen actually during this pandemic, and you know, some of us will adhere and stay at home, others of us will go out with a mask, others will go out without a mask. So I think that it's absolutely impossible to legislate and to plan for everybody doing the same thing. Whether or not that means therefore we should have a carbon market or not, I think is just another one of those things that that just needs to you know, a lot more thought, and probably with from somebody that has a lot more knowledge of it than I do. I think from my perspective is you can't bank on everybody's behaviour is the only thing I would say.
Ian, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, the carbon you might say exchange is very much down to a political solution to maintain certain industries. And I think if we look 100 or 200 years from now, there won't be any carbon offset because we'll have become such a low carbon economy that it become irrelevant.
Thank you. Well, that does bring us to the end of our time, and I know we've got a lot to get through for the rest of the day. So I'd like to say thank you to every one of our panelists, and thanks for the questions coming in. There are a number in the chat if any of the panelists would like to respond, but they'll be there and they'll keep up. And now on that point, I'd like to hand back to Emma. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to our panel and to everyone who commented and asked questions. Hello, can you hear me? So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to continue the discussion from the panel in smaller groups. So in a few moments, you'll be transported to a breakout room where you can actually start to meet some of the other attendees. On having a look at it, I think we're up to 150, which is a fantastic turnout. What we've done is we've already assigned you a chair and he or she will facilitate a review of the learning outcomes from the panel discussion and note down the key takeaways from this discussion and act as your spokesperson. We'll then get everyone back into the main room in 15 minutes time for a quick fire round of feedback. So we'll start the breakouts now. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're just getting everyone back into the main room. I hope you all had an opportunity to meet one another and obviously get to explore some of the fantastic opportunities and challenges that came out of the panel discussion. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to each group in turn and ask the chair to list the top takeaways from their group. Warning, you have 1 minute each. So I'm going to start with Norman Blissett, please, and your group. Norman.
Thank you, Emma. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, excellent.
Yes, thank you.
So quick run through of what we said. The first point is there's such a huge issue that many people may be put off by it, by the sheer scale of it, and they're therefore making it relevant and making it small and attainable, incremental. Thinking big, starting small would feels really important. But also that there's a lot of mixed messages about it as well. So, for example, face masks with COVID are largely non-biodegradable, and we've just adopted them whole scale without seemingly any regard of the impact. So we're only thinking about it from the COVID perspective, important, but there's obviously a downside to that. So there's these mixed messages that are going out that I think are muddying, or we think as a group are muddying the situation. And then final point is there's different starting points for different organisations. So it's very much recognising that we're not all at the same place. Some are way ahead, some are just starting, but there feels like there'll be a momentum for change, particularly in the UK with the climate conference coming up. And many people, especially younger people, are going to be wanting to join companies that have their good credentials. So that's us, Emma.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Norman and Norman's group. Susie, over to you. Susie Brain England, please. Susie, are you there? Saw you pop up initially. We can go to Clive.
It's okay, I'm here.
Hi, Susie.
Hello.
Yes.
Apologies for that. Mine was a small but perfectly formed group spanning from Yorkshire to Zurich. And in both places, whether you're talking about floods in Doncaster or the icebergs, the ice melting on the snow caps in Switzerland, we know what the impact of global warming is. And I guess that each organisation finds that they've got challenges that are very particular to their own sector and their own business, and they've got to solve their problems individually. But generally, I think the biggest takeaway was that good intentions and great ideas were not enough. What it was felt was that there would need to be stronger legislation, whether or not that was tax incentives, which have worked to a degree to date. But ultimately, and this is the relevant point, I think, for the Institute of Directors, it probably needs to be encompassed as a director's duty to be concerned about the environmental impact. So extending the concept of the fiduciary duty and what is the role and responsibility of a director to make that impact on the environment caused by your own business, make that a director's duty. That's our big takeaway.
Thank you so much, Susie and Susie's group. Clive Bridge.
Yeah, hi. So we came up with a number of points. I think, first of all, we generally recognised, obviously, increasingly important subject, but actually it was very much industry specific. So we shouldn't try and have a one size fits all approach. I think second, increasing recognition that there was a tremendous business opportunity from this. It wasn't just a compliance issue. It was going to be a point of differentiation in the future, whether it was from customers or employees. And then from a company reputation point of view, that was also a factor. Although I think we did talk about it's important to keep it fact-based. And there's a lot of emotion around the subject, and it's important that we do the things based on fact rather than just react. I think the third thing was that governance isn't just about making profit, and it should be an important part. But having said that, if we can monetize the benefits, then it will help focus minds more than if we talk about it in more general terms. And I think finally, it's not just about carbon. So that's the area that we all talk about. But actually, if we're talking about sustaining climate change, etc., and the environment, then it's there's other things like water supply, etc., that we also need to take care of.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Clive.
Can I just add something to Susie's point? When she said it should be a director's duty to take into account the climate, it already is. Section 172 of the Companies Act asks you to promote the interests of the company in the best interests of the members as a whole, taking into account the views of the stakeholders. And one of the defined stakeholders, or certainly one that's accepted and used in most case study examples, is the climate. So it's already in there in section 172. Whether it works or not, another question. And I think Susie might be talking about a specific duty to the climate standalone as opposed to one of many, which is where
certainly, yeah, certainly that.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for that. Thank you, Susie. Right, Brendan, over to you, please, and your group takeaways.
The first point is just obviously the current economic environment we're operating in with the impact of COVID. Small and medium enterprises will find it a conflict in terms of survival versus concentrating on other activities. But we need to make sure as chartered directors to put this front and center for the future, because it's important for us all going forward. And in relation to that, we should make sure that all reports coming through the system have an environmental element built into them, because if everybody's talking about it, everybody will start acting about it. So any reports coming in should have an environmental element built into them. And one of the third points we came in is that, we need to drive different behaviors, and it'll be interesting. We now accept certain things as the norm. In 20 or 30 years' time, we will accept the change in environment. We look to the youth and how they interact and their eco-centricity. We need to start thinking that way and understand the change that we can impact on the environment. Okay.
Thank you, Brendan. Mary Campbell, please, in your group.
Hi, thanks. We had a great group, thanks, Emma. We had Wendy, who's a regulator for Guernsey, where they have set out a green fund and they've set out to be green. So we had quite a lot of debate around the carrot and stick approach. We had great contribution from Greg in terms of small businesses. Mm-hmm. Greg and I were two of the people who would have said that the green agenda is not a priority at the moment. And we would have said that because actually so much else is crowding it out. Businesses that employ 160 people who've come through a pandemic, the urgent of trying to keep people in their jobs is crowding out some of the green stuff. Mm. Martin, who'd had a wide-ranging business from food to rockets to consumer research, was making a very strong plea and a very good plea for a sector-by-sector approach. Phil, very wise head, said there's clearly no easy answer here, or we would have found it already. So lots of people know what we should be doing, and lots of words either sounding a bit preachy, maybe from some of the presentations, but the hard reality that in business it's really hard and it's not really all that straightforward. But Phil making a plea as the last presenter was saying around enthusing the young, getting the young people involved, and really getting them to go through some of this stuff. And we finished up with James, and again another discussion on the carrot and stick model. And James is warning that we think from the lovely presentation from Martin. Mario rather from Amazon, looking at moving to the cloud, and that being eco-friendly, and James, calling us to order and saying, yeah, but it didn't actually save a lot of, these kind of behaviors don't necessarily save on the carbon footprint, because the smoke just comes up somewhere else. So, okay, we think we're tying it down this area, but actually where else is it leaching? And, you know, his one-word email, drawing attention to the one-word email stuff that was coming out last week in the press saying, you know, please think about our everyday behaviours and the impact that they're having on the planet, and that the young people are kind of better at it than the rest of us and we should be listening to them more. So I was suitably chastened, Emma. Back over to you.
Thank you. And I'd love to comment, but we're obviously very tight on time. So I'm just going to keep running through everyone and just make sure that we capture all of that. William English, CBE, over to you, please, William.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
In my 1 minute, our excellent team of Chartered Directors reviewed in their introduction to each other who they were and what they did. And I asked them to try to bring together the points collectively that we could bring back to you as a review of the learning outcomes against what they did and their experience was, and essentially at the strategic level. And essentially here we're producing a capability for sustainable greenness that is related and linked to the UN climate goals. And that capability might be split into the ethical, the moral component, and a doctrinal thinking component as to how we think as directors, and then as how we deliver through our structural infrastructure. And taking those three, that would deliver a sustainable capability. So the morality of getting people to, and the ethical business of getting people's cultural shift through the thinking and linked to the doctrine was really important, and through the people, planet and profit hoop through which we perhaps might be jumping as the triple bottom line. And that would then give us, if we were working our thoughts through that in business and what we were doing, and pass that on to our stakeholders, both internally and externally, then we would have a common approach to the way that we were going about our business. The second point then came on to really two more physical ones, one certainly at a higher level and another as a more general one. And the higher level one was the structure of finance that was in the system of finance through banking that was going to then support the whole process of business as it goes forward. So underpinned by the grand strategic of banking finance related to green issues and its understanding. And this was an enabler, enabling everybody else to benefit. And lastly, we came to one on the supply chain, and were given an example of how that needed to adjust. For every single business it would be different, but we were given an example of materials coming from the Far East coming back here and how that was changing through the thought process of the top. So to reiterate, our 3 points were about building capability, green capability, based on the conceptual doctrinal aspects, the moral ethical piece, and the physical supporting enabling piece that was going to have to go there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. We still have quite a few groups to go through, so I'm going to ask everyone to try and stick to the 60 seconds, starting with Charles. Thanks, Charles.
You're most welcome. Hello, Emma. Hello, everybody. So we started with a fantastic provocation from Alan, who said, is the private sector as a whole buying in as fast as the public sector is? And if not, how do we incentivize everybody to move faster? And that set off a chain of thoughts. The first thing is that it has started and it is snowballing. Some of this is legislative or compliance based, and increasingly it's difficult to escape this anywhere in the world. So that's encouraging that it's global. But actually it doesn't need legislation, because already there's an immense amount of moral pressure, particularly from the young, but also from clients, from employees more generally, from some shareholders too. It's encouraging, of course, that that all the major investing groups are now focused very much on ESG, and also encouraging that that is thriving despite the year that we have had. There's no reduction in the intensity of ESG-based investing, which is terrific to hear. It would be very nice for small businesses to know how do I go about doing this? What are the practical steps that I need? Where do I meet a carbon auditor? And if I do, where will this person take me? And that's it. I'm sure that's my 60 seconds. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Charles. Excellent. Andy Leask, please.
Thanks, Emma, and hello, everybody. I would converge all of what we said into cultural change, individual and corporate level. So we talked about energy generation, we talked about consumers' buying habits and whether that can drive change in the big corporates. But I think the example that Ian gave in the panel about PPE proves that we can force cultural change, but it's a medium-term objective rather than short-term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Janos, our group, please.
Thanks, Emma. The bad news is it's difficult to come with something fresh to say after all these groups have already covered all the point. The good news is that it will enable me to go very quickly. Point number one, already raised by some groups, is the survival piece of the current COVID, that some sectors has accelerated the change, particularly in the oil and gas sector, towards put the climate agenda right up. For some others, it's really survival and sort of ensure they go home tonight. Number two is the point William made in his group about the need to see it on an integrated basis, the shifting of the supply chain, circular economy that creates some opportunities socially, but we need to see the totality in order to have the net zero effect. That brought us into the conversation about the economic consequences, and one of the panel members used the word monetize the debate. So we highlighted that in order to talk about facts and not only emotions. We highlighted the point about technology, and of course we have heard many of these before, but perhaps the word blockchain was not, it was perhaps new for some of us, and how it can be used in this debate. And last but not least, the point made by the previous group about culture. It's all about leadership and starting from from the top, and unless it's embraced throughout the organization, very much like the health and safety issue on the agenda a few years ago. Now the climate change, unless it's fully embraced, is not going to happen.
Excellent summary. Thank you, Janos. Deborah Morton-Dare, over to you, please.
Yeah,
60 seconds.
The top observation I'm going to make, Martin made one right at the beginning about how two disciplines coming together is often the biggest way of resulting in something innovative happening, and his observation was so many Nobel Prizes are a result of that. So the combination of disciplines talking and coming up with solutions was a really big one, and I think everyone agreed with that. I think another point is, are we really focusing on the right thing? We feel better if we don't use a plastic bag, but actually the biggest problem is lack of proper adequate waste disposal in less developed countries. So are we focusing on the right thing? What can we all go away and do individually? And I think Charlotte's point that anyone who doesn't have this as a long-term agenda as a board is really not seeing what's coming up. So be innovative and try and see the ways you'll be affected.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Deborah. Penny Parkin-Mason, please. Rochelle, can we come to you next, if that's okay, while we sort of wait for Penny?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Emma.
Hi, Rochelle.
Yes, we spoke about the importance of leadership through all of this, and while the subject is really important in the public domain, whose responsibility is it to drive the agenda forward? And the discussion centered around it's the chair and the chief executive clearly who will help to drive getting the conversation on the agenda. However, companies that move this issue forward in a strong way also have a key champion to drive the initiative through, to follow through on all the points. And for very large companies, that's possible. For smaller companies, that creates more of a challenge because their resources are less. The conversation about resilience came around the example that Mario showed, how Amazon was able to take its internal applications and then apply them to the business applications for their future growth. Again, this SME environment doesn't have access to the resources that larger companies have. And so what's important for SMEs is what seems to be a gap right now for SMEs, perhaps around the world, is how can they take this subject and what steps are available to them, what resources are available to them to implement ESG processes and procedures in their businesses while they're responding and trying to survive through the disruption created by COVID. So the subject is definitely very important. However, there are challenges, especially in the SME spaces, that knowledge and information could be shared that will better enable SMEs to.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you. Richard Smith, please.
Yeah, hi. Well, many of the points already raised, but a couple of things we had was, is sustainability really a global topic at the moment? Many people have been put off by the sheer scale of the issue and the opportunity, so there's a bit of inaction because of that. Mm-hmm. There was concerns over how is this being measured, and take the example of the lifetime of an electric car versus a diesel car. There are many ways of measuring its impact and its footprint. Are we using the right one, and is that consistent? It was also felt that education was probably going to be the greatest thing to undertake to get adults and children to really understand about sustainability, and it's going to probably be a couple of generations to get it really embedded. And then finally, because I'm from the chemical industry, I know that my industry, because it underpins virtually every single thing we do in the world, we are already doing a lot on sustainability, and it will be the chemical industry which does a lot of the driving to make this all happen. So that's us. Okay.
Thank you very much, Richard. Rob Smith and then Robert Varley. So Rob first, please.
Yes, Emma, I sent you a message a while ago. I was blocked out of the room for about 12 or 13 minutes of the session, so I couldn't contribute. For some reason, my video was blocked. But if you'd like to ask Alec Rocha to respond.
Alex, yes. Are we able to spotlight Alex? Why don't we come to Robert Varley first, if that's okay, while we locate Alex, if that's okay. Thank you. And sorry, I didn't see your message, Rob.
Yeah, good afternoon. And I will be very brief because I think pretty much everything that we discussed has been said before. But starting from health and safety is a great example of how over a generation, the culture in the boardroom completely changed. Massive challenge of COVID, of course. But even with that, a recognition that this subject is too big and too important for us to ignore. So even small things, walking the walk as a leader, and getting the issue on the agenda so that we can be credible when we engage. The recognition that customers are increasingly demanding green credibility and green behaviours, and if we ignore that, we'll ignore it at our peril. A recognition that we're all going to have to learn a whole load of new skills, new techs, new ways of working, and if we don't get on that bus now, we're going to be behind the curve. Also, a discussion about the role of lobby groups like the IoD and recognition of the really great voice that the IoD has had through COVID, and a voice right into the heart of government, and a question of how can IoD help to move government on so that the regulation and the physical environment in which we operate is more effective in this respect. Finally, in Wales, they've got a Future Generations Commissioner with 7 wellbeing goals. And maybe if we had somebody advocating at the heart of government for the future generations, we'd be in a better place. But we need to build a green recovery, not just a green survival to COVID. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. I see Alex is up. I think Nigel is also nominating for Team 3. So I think Alex.
Go Nigel.
I don't mind whichever, Alex.
Go Nigel. Go for it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nigel.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so picking up a lot of the same themes, actually. Good discussion. I mean, there's a real urgency to this. 2050 is not far away at all. And I think when you talk about the younger generation, they absolutely get it, and they will be hankering for action now. And I think there's a real urgency. So that would be one point that I think we ought to take away from this. We wanted to sort of lead by example and have some tangible things that we could do and point to and say, this is what we're doing. And then it was felt quite strongly that we need to have a framework in which we report our progress. So those were the main summaries: urgency, actions, lead by example, and then have a framework for understanding how we report on that and how we're doing against it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nigel. Now, unfortunately, we have to move on in terms of the agenda because of time, but that was, exceptionally rich, and we are recording this, so we'll be able to share that with everyone, and in terms of capturing all of those outputs. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panel, our chairs, and for all of you for participating. So what we're going to move on to now is the announcement of this year's Chartered Director of the Year Award. So thank you team. So on behalf of the IoD, I want to extend our warmest congratulations to all of the 2020 Chartered Director graduates. Hundreds of directors apply to become chartered every year, but only the very best complete the qualification and pass the final interview. And Chartered Director is more than an academic qualification or designation. It has to be earned. And you have proven through independent review that you have the knowledge, skills, and critical mindset of an effective director. You make a valuable contribution to your board, organisation, and the wider community of stakeholders you serve. Chartered directors improve the effectiveness of their boards, demonstrate strategic leadership, champion standards of ethical governance, act independently and with integrity, and strive to always raise the bar, demonstrating their competencies and qualities as a role model for the next generation of directors. Chartered directors are industry leaders in the practice of corporate governance, and your passion for continuous improvement is one that the IoD holds in the highest regard. At a time like this, our Chartered Director community has never been so pivotal, and we are committed to championing your success. We recognise and applaud the commitment that you have made to continuing professional development, and implore you to continue to give back and share your expertise with fellow members. So I'm delighted to announce the shortlisted candidates for 2020. These shortlisted candidates have scored the overall highest totals across the certificate, diploma, and final interview. So congratulations to Randall Black, owner of Edutainer 53 Consulting, IoD International. Congratulations to Anne-Marie Mounterfield, Chief Executive of Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, IoD South. And congratulations to Paul Mulvaney, Executive Director of ESB Networks, IoD Republic of Ireland. So, without further ado, I am delighted to announce that the winner of the Chartered Director of the Year Award 2020 is Paul Mulvaney. I think, Paul, we're going to try and get you up on screen to say a few words. Congratulations.
Wow, thanks very much, Emma. Chuffed, absolutely. Thanks very much. Yeah, huge surprise, and And judging by the, the caliber of people on this call, for example, to have kind of come out on top and something like that, it's fantastic. So I was delighted to become a chartered director at all. That was a great achievement, and then to be on the shortlist was fantastic. But yeah, this is bowled over, really great. Thanks very much. And I really enjoyed the content of the course and the time spent there in Leamington Spa. Was with a great group going through, the week we spent there, and then in Pall Mall for maybe 3 or 4 days in prep for the chartered exams and interviews. So the whole experience is fantastic, and yeah, thanks to IoD, and yeah, I'm delighted. Thank you very much. And I see lots of well wishes coming through. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, huge congratulations again, Paul, and well done to Anne-Marie and to Randy as well. Now on to part 2. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our former chair, Charlotte Valeur, to deliver today's keynote speech on neurodiversity and the boardroom. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here, and congratulations, Paul, for the award. Well deserved, and congratulations to all of you for being here and being chartered directors. That's the way we need to go in a much bigger way. I'm here today to talk a little bit about why I think that it's time more business realize the opportunity they're missing with regards to neurodiversity, just to throw another one into the ring. As many of you are probably aware, I came out as autistic earlier this year, and that's something that runs very sort of strongly in my family. And just recently, in fact, 10th of November this month, we've had Professor Simon Baron-Cohen from Cambridge coming out with a new book that is focused on this. He's world leading in the area of autism specifically, but is broadening out a bit more around neurodiversity as well. And he talks very much about how historically it has developed from what he calls systemizing people. And when you have a bell curve, you have on one side people that are very systemic and have or systematic and have very strong patterns in everything they do, as opposed to the other side that is very empathetic in everything, but with less patterns. And obviously, as a bell curve, you've got the middle where you have a balance, and then you have the two extremes. And he is suggesting in that book that that people have a high level of systemizing capabilities, about 40 times faster in the pattern detection. And there's a very, very high, in the extremes of that, a very high percentage of people from the autistic spectrum coming into that. And his theory is that that they were a very strong part of the cognitive revolution we saw about 100 years ago, and that was driven pretty much by pattern seekers, as he calls the book. Systemizing things has made music. No other animal before human beings has made music, but to be able to make music, you have to have that mindset that you can make things, put them into a system and into a pattern that then creates the music that's being created. And that we created 40,000 years ago with the first flutes that came out, and the flute made then had the same 5 holes as what they're using in flutes today. So it's quite extraordinary. Someone asked enough questions of what to do with a piece of bone as it was when you had different holes in it, and then to create music from that. And that was about the time where the cognitive revolution really started pushing ahead. Coming into 5,000 years ago, when you had writing and math. Again, to develop writing and math, you need highly systemizing brains that can put things together in a way so that it creates a system that the many can use. And that really drove the whole evolution of human invention. Quite an interesting book. I can recommend having a read of it, which sort of explains maybe some of the ways that people moved forward. For me, I would say that unfortunately, the world has decided that many neurodiverse people don't really fit into how the world would like to see people be today, which means they get pushed out of most social circles, and sometimes also out of the workplace. And therefore we don't take advantage of those kind of capabilities that neurodiverse people have. And especially at leadership level, it's pretty key to ensure that you get that cognitive diversity into the decision-making body, where you have all. That's what nature intended for us to do. Nothing is really a coincidence in nature. So if we try to look a bit more into why do we have a certain percent of people having a specific mindset, why do we have some people on either side on the very extreme, that's not something that nature created by mistake. That's something nature created because that's what we sometimes need to actually make sustainable change, and to go in and question the set patterns and try to push in to make sure that things change. I mean, following the rules is good, but it doesn't change the world, right? It's when you try to find new rules and not follow the set rules that actually things change. But having said that, with so many billions of people in the world, it's pretty important that people do follow rules. However, we want to continue to move forward and try to press on with innovation to make sure that we as a species can survive. So maybe we can consider in this body of decision-making powers where we have largely excluded neurodiverse people, has that partly helped us getting to the place where we are today, which could be better. We have made decisions for us as humans over thousands of years, but specifically the last 200 years or so, that has not helped us move forward. Progress, we talked about this in our breakout group, progress, what we perceive as progress is not always progress. It's convenience, maybe plastic, for example, but it certainly is not progress. It is in fact part of what's killing us. And we need to ask these questions of what we perceive as progress, whether it is indeed progress, or whether we should have refined some of the things that we had that were more pure, maybe, 100 years ago, where we used different materials, or even 50 years ago, where we used different materials. I remember getting milk delivered in glass bottles, which were reused, as opposed to in plastic or paper bottles. So I think the kind of questions that neurodiverse people would often put forward would be the questions that would move the dial on. And if we exclude that in the boardroom specifically and other decision-making groups, we are really cutting ourselves short, in my view, of what we should do when we make decisions, which is having as big a body and as big a variety of cognitive skills at the table as possible. That's not always comfortable, right? That's just not always comfortable. It is uncomfortable if people disagree. And we have created a way or a culture in the world where we like everybody to be the same, and we like everybody to agree on things. And it's uncomfortable to go through a conversation of disagreement when in fact it's an opportunity to grow. Every time someone disagrees with you, you grow, or you grow if you embrace it, because the one in front of you might just know something that you don't know. And then it's okay to change your mind, right? It's okay to say, okay, actually, I hear what you're saying, and I now have another opinion on that. So why did I choose to come out and say I was autistic recently? Well, I have known for years. I have a son who's autistic as well. And it kind of bothered me that I couldn't just be fully open with everything, because actually I'm pretty bad at not being fully open. So everyone around me, my family, my closest friends and people that are important to me knew already. And all the boards, for example, I served on already knew as well. So it didn't come as a surprise to anyone who was close to me. But it was concerning because I see the pattern of people being excluded because of biases against neurodiverse individuals, and therefore it was a concern for me to come out. But it was something that was planned over a couple of years with Autistica, that I've been doing work with around developing autistic board members. And they wanted to have this specific campaign and wanted me to support them to raise £10 million into research. And of course, once you start planning that, you just have to go ahead with it. It did come out quite well. I had an enormous amount of support and really kind people. And I also had a number of boards contacting me to ask if I would be interested in joining. So it didn't, in fact, destroy what I have worked hard to build for 38 years in my career, but it was still concerning but today it's a lot nicer that I can be completely clear with it and just say it up front without having any without having any issues with that. My own experience is sort of in the boardroom is that the world is simple only when it behaves, quite frankly, and it never behaves, right? So therefore, nothing is ever simple. We live in a world of rapid change, of differences happening very quickly, and it's being around us all the time. I'm very autodidact, so throughout my life, I have just read my way through to anything I want to know about, and I'm also lucky enough to have photographic memory, which is really helpful in the boardroom. Different boards, for example, I always wanted to be serving on different boards for all different sectors, as opposed to, I know many directors who just do one kind of boards. I just want different ones all the time, because every time you learn. And through that, I myself can see that I follow patterns. And I think those patterns that you can see makes you see a full piece of the organization faster. And certainly seeing the pattern in certain things, I have noticed that that I can do that faster than the rest of the board. We had, for example, one board where we had a risk session, and in terms of impact and risk rating and likelihood of it happening, I was also very further out on the impact. And the four other directors said, "Oh, are you very risk averse?" I said, "I'm not risk averse at all. I don't mind risk, but I calculate and I see everything." So I said, "Okay, let's list what impacts we see with each different risk." And on average, the other directors had about 5 impacts, when on average I had 10. And when they went through the 10 impacts that I had, all of them were like, "Oh, okay." And we ended up putting the risk ratings out because they could now see more. And this is one of my sort of strap lines: we've got to see with all eyes. So if you haven't got the ability to take that whole picture in, or look for all these patterns that my brain just does all the time, then you need to lean into people who has got that ability, and then bring that onto the table. It's also a very irritating ability to have sometimes, but you know, we've got to work. My children find it incredibly irritating when they want to do something, and I say this and this and this and this can happen, and they're like, "Okay, Mom, right? We hear that you're seeing everything that could go wrong here, but there's also the things that could go right." And of course, I have to work with them on that. Luckily, the world has moved forward. Boards are much more open to diverse people and realizing they have to do it. Investors are in fact now starting to say that undiverse boards are negligent. So I think we're going to see in the next proxy season. I was just at an ISS seminar speaking a month ago, and it was very clear that the institutional investors there were saying, well, if we don't see both cognitive but also background, all kind of differences on boards, we are going to have to vote some of those directors off the boards because actually they are not giving us the returns we could have, and they're not protecting us in terms of risks as much as they could, because they simply can't see what they can't see. The unknowns are too big. So you reduce the unknowns by having all these different mindsets there, and including neurodiversity, obviously from my point of view, would be a good thing to do, because they tend to spend more time looking at all the things that's in front of you. So I think probably neurodiverse leaders lead in different ways. Luckily today, authenticity is such a good word and people like it, which helps me because that's all I can be. So what you see is what you get. And with that comes sometimes also I find it quite difficult to try to paint a picture that isn't the factual picture. So I come across a bit blunt, and I'm hopelessly honest. It is what it is. I seem to have survived it over the years, but it comes with difficulties as well sometimes. Most people are actually not that interested, probably including myself sometimes. So I wouldn't ask my son, does my bum look big in this? Because he would probably say, yes, Mom, it does. So we weigh in. Don't ask questions you don't want to ask us for answers for, right? So I want to just continue to push raising awareness. I'm in the process of launching an Institute of Neurodiversity with a group of businesses, such support from them, such as Microsoft, some of the big fours, Jacobs Engineering. I've done lots of speaking and bringing sort of neurodiversity networks together. Of course, I think what there is a gap in the market is a voice that represents all of us and also bringing us together in the community. We don't naturally come into communities because we spend most of our lives being pushed out of social circles and communities. So at some stage we kind of stop seeking it. But actually, I would like to create a place where we are all feeling comfortable that we belong. So neurodiverse individuals and their allies are welcome as with no membership fee. We just need to bring people together. And we've started some pages on LinkedIn and Facebook called Impact on Neurodiversity, as we can't call ourselves an institute until we have come through with the application. So in short, I think businesses need to consider if they have that full decision-making body that can give them the right answers, or different answers maybe, or answers that might be something other people haven't thought about, and bring in all the different kind of people into that decision-making body and ensure that they also have some neurodiverse thinkers in there, because that will help the decision-making. And hopefully that will become more and more accepted worldwide. And I will certainly try to do mine to push that issue as hard as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I know many of you will have questions, but we're very fortunate that Charlotte's going to be joining our panel. So our panel discussion is on diversity and inclusion. And with that, I would like to welcome Carl Pemberton, who's kindly moderating our next panel. So please continue to post in the chat comments and questions, and the team are collating those and we'll be sharing those with Carl to pose to the panel. But thanks again, Charlotte.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Charlotte. That was absolutely fantastic. I really welcome your openness there. And for this next session, I want to welcome our panel for this section on diversity and inclusion. And we have some wonderful people from around the world this afternoon joining us. We have Talita Ferreira, we have Jennifer Tharp, we have Charlotte, who we've just heard from, and we have Dr. Susie Walton. If I can just go around as you are on the screen there, just by way of a quick introduction. Talita, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Carl. So I am a chair of audit at the moment and a non-exec director, but I spend my time being very passionate about culture, change, and how we can increase psychological safety in boards, because I feel that helps inclusion.
Thank you. And Jennifer?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Tharp. I'm a board director and consultant based in Silicon Valley. That's why I sound funny. I work with large public companies, Fortune 500 and high growth firms to increase fiduciary oversight, transparency and accountability. And I'm particularly interested in sustainability issues, social justice, and those impacts in the boardroom.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Susie?
Hi, everybody. I'm Susie Walton. I'm a board member on the Institute of Directors board. In fact, I think I'm the longest standing board member ever. I sit on many boards. My background is central government. I was in the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit, and the Ministry of Defence, from where I gained a PhD in military suicide. I used to be an actress, a scientist, a journalist. I am now a non-executive director sitting on many boards. I'm passionate about corporate governance. The best thing I ever did was Chartered Director. But I'm, I hope, a really powerful advocate for diversity, because I've been a scientist trying to break into governance. I'm a mother of 7, and you know, the youngest arrived in lockdown. So I know all about the issues that people face when they're juggling multiple responsibilities. And I'm delighted to be here on the panel, Carl.
Thank you, Susie. And for myself, Carl Pemberton, I'm the Managing Director at Active Chartered Financial Planners, and I'm also the branch chair for the IoD in the Northeast Tees Valley region. So, going on to our debate this afternoon, we want to talk about you know, what does board diversity really mean today, and how do we best integrate that, obviously, into every element of our business? Charlotte's already mentioned some fantastic things there about the thought process and not having everybody within the board thinking the same. And I'll come to yourself first, Jennifer, if you don't mind. What do you see as the major impact of not having everybody being the same on the board? Certainly, you've got some fantastic examples of being over there in the States.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think that one of the things that I see the most, since I work very closely with Silicon Valley startup firms and high technology firms, is when everyone in the room looks the same and thinks the same, you end up very limited. I think Charlotte touched on this a little bit with the conversations with diverse thinkers can be more difficult. But one thing that I have found in the boardroom is that diversity unlocks innovation by creating an environment where outside the box ideas are heard. In Silicon Valley particularly, it can be very challenging because everyone wants things to go fast and to move very quickly. And so I know that if I want things to go quickly, I want conversations to be easy, then if I have you hire your friends and everyone knows each other, before you know it, everyone looks exactly alike and everyone thinks exactly alike. And yes, you can move fast and break things, but you end up missing huge aspects of risk that are really critical. And it's very important that leaders value these differences and that people can find senior people to go to bat for compelling ideas and persuade those folks to deploy resource to develop those ideas. So without that diversity of thought that comes from all these different types of diversity, organizations are really limiting themselves. And I see it over and over again in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and Talita, I think you've got similar examples from your time working around Europe as well on that exact point.
Yes, so I was in a large automotive company at one of the top global levels, and we hired a new main board member, and it was a woman, and we were all so excited about that. The thing is, her background was very similar to everyone else on the board. And I remember at the most senior levels how disappointed we were after 6 months because there was really no change. And so it's so important to have people who think differently, who just analyze data in a different way, who have different solutions, who have more innovative solutions, because otherwise it's exactly like that. People then say, oh, well, she's not making a huge difference. But the difference isn't because of her, it's just that the thoughts aren't different. We haven't really thought about what does the board need to drive innovation. And so I think that what is it that we need in innovation is such an important question to ask when we're also looking at diversity.
Yeah, sure. And in terms of those, the comfort levels there of diversification were mentioned, how do you think that certainly feels? I'll come to yourself, Susie, on this one. How do you think that sits from a UK perspective? You sat obviously on the board with the IoD and represented or worked within government. How do you think the comfort levels feel there at the moment?
The comfort levels on boards themselves?
Yeah, but in terms of accepting and embracing this?
Yeah, I think things have changed. In the last decade, there is definitely more diversity on boards. It's still the case that some boards have to consciously try to get the diversity. Very often the recruitment procedures seem to subconsciously rule out certain people. I'll give a brief example. Just after I left government, there was a job advert which was for a group that was working within Whitehall, SW1. But the job advert actually said board members must be prepared to undergo travel, difficult travel, on Her Majesty's ships. And I keep this for when I give talks because I've yet to see an example of where, I won't name the body, but where it's ever gone anywhere other than SW1. So to talk about people needing to undergo arduous journeys on Her Majesty's ships, well, how much diversity do you think there would be in the recruitment pool for that? So I think that there has been change and there is diversity. I still see problems with recruiters. So for example, being a chartered director and being a mother, being female, lots of things, I feel I offer diversity, but I'm often having to convince headhunters of what a chartered director offers. And I don't think the conversation should be like that. I don't feel that we should be justifying what diversity we bring. So I think we've gone some way. There is, back to your question, there is comfort with diversity. There isn't enough comfort. And if I was going to take the defensive position, if you have a board where everybody is different, a truly diverse board, then there is a challenge for that board to operate. The board must keep the organization safe, solvent, strategic and compliant. But if there is real diversity, then to use Charlotte's example of the risk register, if you're all looking at a risk register and you're all diverse, you'll all see 20 different angles to that risk register. So if we all come at it from our own different perspectives, it makes it very challenging for the chair of a board to take all that divergent thinking and bring us together as a board to take a decision. So there are challenges to diversity. So I think boards are getting more comfortable, but it is difficult to have to truly operate well as a diverse board. So we're going in the right direction, but I still think there's still some way to go.
Thanks, Susie. And I suppose that leads me on to a point which I'll come to you on, Charlotte, is it's something that was brought up earlier with regards to the green agenda, and that's leadership. And does it start at the very top, or is it beyond leadership now in terms of, do we still have an issue at the top?
So for me, leadership, yes, it does start at the top. We all lead, we're all leaders, right? We start out by leading ourselves the day we're born. So at a level, we're all leaders, or we should be. We can also choose not to be, but that's still a decision. So, but the tone from the top should be set for sure. And I think on something like diversity, I mean, for me, it has to do with as well, I mean, what sort of leadership maturity level do we operate at? And generally, when you look at the sort of vertical levels of maturity, you find there's about 7 levels, and 85% of the population work at level 1 to 3, and the remaining 15 at level sort of 4 to 6, and maybe 100 people in the world at level 7. But that's sort of that insight and wisdom, if you want, beyond knowledge. Knowledge is horizontal. And if we are looking, for example, to the younger people, and this is where leadership comes from the top, but what we need to do is challenge that leaders have to be old, right? Because leaders don't have to be old. Look at some of our unicorn companies. That's not old people running those or building those. So I think we have to rethink what is a leader, and we are doing that with diversity in terms of accepting that it's not only men that are leaders, women can be leaders too. But you know, we still have a way to go. Yes, it has improved, as Susie says, and one of the reasons is definitely what Susie says, that it takes longer and the leaders are not pushing it quite as hard. Is it does make meetings more difficult. It does make making decisions more difficult, because you need to spend more time turning all the stones, and you need to spend more time finding that common place of agreement, where everybody can live with it, even if they don't agree completely. But that has to be driven by the top. If we as leaders can't show the way, I mean, then who can? I mean, I think that's a cop-out if we are saying, oh, well, we can't show the way because it's too hard in meetings, for example, or it's too, oh, I want to hold on to my privileges. There's the whole power, privilege and power balance, right? Well, you need to use your privileges. All of us have privileges. We have got to use them to share them with the people who hasn't got privileges and bring them along with us, right? Instead of just holding on to them. That shows an insecurity when you do that. So it has to be led by the top. The tone from the top. Us as directors are showing the way and being role models every single day, and we must continue to do that.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'll just come to you, Talita, just to bring this back to the IoD in a way. You're a tutor on the Chartered Directorship Programme, and you help deliver some of the development programmes for probably many of us that have been in the room today. diversity and inclusion, or the benefits of having a diverse board, obviously form a big part of that program that we deliver. How have you found that, and how do you feel as though it's been received, should I say, of late?
I'll just talk about last week, because I delivered a Leadership for Directors course virtually last week, an open course, and we had 12 participants, 12 directors on the course. And the diversity discussion actually took twice the time that that I had planned for. We discussed it for 40 minutes. It just shows the passion and the engagement and the understanding of why it's really necessary, and why we as boards need to think broader and include more of the quieter voices. So I do think it's an extremely important part, and I think it's also extremely important to hear different views from different organizations to help stimulate that peer debate within the group. So I can definitely say from all the courses that I've run myself virtually, that's one of the areas where we always spend more time having a discussion as a group. And I find that it's the right type of discussion around how can we really improve diversity, and how do we make it resonate with what the organization needs and the resonance with the customer base of that organization.
Fantastic, thanks, Talita. On a leading point, it came up again in the Green Agenda discussion, and I know it came up when we've spoken previously, and that comes to around culture. And I'll come to yourself, Jennifer, if you don't mind. How do you feel that culture plays a big part in this? Because I know personally, it is more sincere, and as you were saying, Charlotte, it becomes more genuine if it's actually part of what you do rather than being forced to do it. What's your views on culture and how that's integrated then within business, and the benefits of having that great culture derives to your business?
I want to start my response by acknowledging something that Charlotte said about age diversity, because it made me think of a cultural issue on boards that I see all the time, which, you know, if many of us are familiar with the story of Theranos, which was a blood testing company in Silicon Valley, and it had, you know, wonderful potential, a fantastic story. Everything was incredibly dynamic, but all of the board members were very distinguished, and they were leaders in politics and the military and so forth. And all of them were so far away from understanding exactly what the company did. So the culture ended up being built around accepting the CEO's word, accepting the leadership's word, and the board ended up being very much a rubber stamp. And there also wasn't an inquiry into the culture of the organization. Everybody just knew that everything was going fine. And so no one had the knowledge and ability to delve into the risks that there was massive fraud going on. So the importance of diversity on culture cannot be understated. It is just, we need to make sure that, to your point, we don't just have diversity as a tick box. We don't just have like, oh, we have one woman and we have one person of color, because then it's very, very easy to marginalize those people. We have to embrace all these cultures. We have to embrace the diversity of thought, and we have to embrace those really, really difficult conversations, or else we're not going to be addressing risk correctly. We're not going to be helping our organizations innovate and helping them lead to the direction that they need to go.
Yeah, and there's some examples that we're seeing around Europe. I think, Talita, you mentioned it the other day when we spoke about the new German ruling that was coming in with regards to quotas. Are they a positive step? Could they have negative consequences, or do they go far enough? What's the panel's view on those, Talita? Let's start with yourself.
Well, let's just say when I worked in a German company probably 8 or 10 years ago, the DAX companies, so the listed companies in Germany, had all come together and said, let's just go for our own targets. And at the time, with their lobbying with government, it was agreed, and it was just targets. And it's very interesting that the new legislation now says there are quotas, because it means to me that in those 8 years, we haven't moved forward fast enough. And I would come back to exactly Jennifer's point on culture. If we don't have psychological safety in our organizations, it won't mean that anyone will really express what they really think. I love Dr. Timothy Clark's definition. It's when it's not expensive to be yourself. And it ties very much back into Charlotte's point around authenticity and only being who you are, because that's all you can be, Charlotte. And I think that's really the important thing. If you can't speak truth to power, if you can't be who you are, I think the quotas are important to move us in the right direction. But again, it shouldn't be those boxes that we tick, because if it's boxes that we tick, I work for some companies that are extremely good, or have worked for certain companies that are extremely good at ticking boxes. If they don't tick a culture change box, then I don't think it will change anything for us, really.
Yeah, Charlotte, anything to expand on there?
Yes, I mean, I've spent many years, decades working for equality. Well, most of my life actually has been one of my drivers, equality for all. The whole gender came in when I started serving on boards 15 years ago, and it was just so weird that we as leaders couldn't figure out why it makes so much sense to be diverse as a board. And I'm now sort of a bit tired, right? I'm tired of discussing, why do we do this? I just want to talk about how do we fix it? How do we make it happen? And so I've focused on that for at least 10 years, and still nothing has happened, as we just heard said as well, because it just is not moving fast enough. We haven't got the time to mess about. And yes, people like the privileges, but it's time to let go. And if quotas is what will make that happen faster, then I'm all for it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlotte. The final question that I'll pose to everybody or bring to the fore here is technology. And we're obviously meeting online this year, and we've probably all used Zoom more than we ever dreamed we would. Certainly, I never knew it existed before March of this year, so that proves a point in itself. But do you think technology will have a massive part to play in inclusivity and diversity, in terms of younger people seem to be glued to their devices and screens, certainly far more than older generations, let's say? I don't know if anybody in particular wants to come into that. Jennifer, I'll come to you, seeing as though you are in Silicon Valley.
Sure. Well, obviously, technology is kind of our current life. I mean, just look at us today. One of the things I think that is a struggle with technology is I think that it becomes more and more difficult for us to embrace diversity in the current world that we're living in, with remote work and remote conferences. Minority voices tend to get lost. It's much easier for those conversations to just not happen, because we are focused on, addressing certain bullet points and getting those jobs done. So that's a risk in our current environment. But technology in the boardroom has been amazing. Just in the past 6 years while I've been a board director, seeing the way that materials are changing, and we're getting information in more and more dynamic ways. I'm sure most of us have had experiences where suddenly we have access to Tableau information. We can drill down into the data to the right degree, to the point of being able to provide assurance, and then bubble back up in order to perform at the oversight level. But so we have the assurance through technology that we know what's going on in our organizations. So technology, I'm finding to be an incredible boom for the director in order to really ensure that we're doing our jobs well and that we're governing our organizations to the best of our ability.
Yeah, sure. And I know certainly within our business, the technological advances that, let's say, we've been forced into this year has certainly brought people within our business to the fore. And in normal times, those projects may have been headed by somebody different, but the younger generation, certainly within Active, have really stepped up and have been absolutely phenomenal. And they've really proved beyond their worth, really, in terms of how technology and that inclusiveness of bringing them, you know, to the board table, the benefit that that can actually derive. Does anybody have anything else to add on technology and the current predicament?
Yeah, Carl, I'd just like to come in there. I'll take it specifically from the COVID perspective and the lockdown. There's been an awful lot in the press and said here too about how technology has been a great thing. There is a corollary, and that's the mental health impact. And there has been, the data shows, a very detrimental impact on some women of having to do their job from home while they've got multiple responsibilities. Now, of course, men are parents too, but the data is showing that the burden of running the house, homeschooling, etc., has actually fallen to women. So in that respect, technology has enabled people to do their jobs, but these other societal factors, which have not yet been equalized, have put a tremendous mental health burden on some women. And that, I think, we are going to see the impacts of that for many years. I sit on a government council to do with mental health at work. It's something we're acutely aware of, and I don't think there are any answers yet. So technology is an enabler, but it's also has been a barrier for some people. So I think from that diversity point of view, we always have to remember that if something is an enabler, it may also be working in a detrimental way to some sector.
Definitely. And yes, completely agree with the mental health point as well there, Susie. You know, I certainly am a big advocate of mental health and well-being, and to take Charlotte's point earlier, you know, there's nothing better than actually you know, being open and honest if you are struggling in that area. And you know, certainly the times we're all going through at the moment are probably the most testing I've been through, and probably the most testing many of us have been through. So you know, do speak up there. We're coming to the end of this section. I've got a couple of questions that I need to ask, but just to wrap up before I ask these specific questions, I think it's common that we all agree that the inclusivity and diversity actually proves and actually gives us all an opportunity within our business. I think we all agree on that. I think, again, similar to the green agenda that was discussed earlier, if you're not open to being diverse and inclusive, and you're not welcoming of this through your culture, then there are potentially significant opportunities that you are missing. And as we've said before, you know, you'd rather be at the front of that parade leading that change than being dragged along kicking and screaming just because quotas and government rules are forcing you along that route. So if that's okay, I will move to a couple of questions that have come through. So thank you very much for those. There's a question here for Susie, and I'll read this as it's written here. It says, in government, there was a behavioural science and nudge unit, which was very successful and emulated by Obama. What would be the benefit of reintroducing elements into policy making in government and business?
Very good question. There is still a nudge unit. It's called the Behavioural Insights. I forget the actual name. It's come out of government. It's now a standalone unit. So behavioural insights still feed into government policy. In terms of, you could rephrase that question as being on boards. Should we have behavioural scientists on boards? I am a behavioural scientist, so I would say yes. I think that for any decision a board makes, there will be a financial angle, there will be a risk angle, there will also be a human behaviour angle. And I think it's very important that behavioural science does feature. If you took a group of headhunters and you say, give me the top 3 skills for boards, they'd have government background, they'd have an MBA, they'd have an economist. They probably wouldn't say behavioural scientist. But I know, as somebody with that skill set, I hope there is a value you can offer, because ultimately whatever policy a board endorses, it's about how people behave and being cognizant of the response of how the policy is going to play out. So very, very good question. And yes, behavioural insights are fundamental to government and to boards.
I think on that point there, Susie, I know we did it again as a business, as a board. I think it's stepping outside the comfort zone when you have to look deep at yourself and actually do a board evaluation of the type of characters and behaviour of each individual. So I can say firsthand that it actually delivers fantastic results, but it is an uncomfortable process when you don't know what it's going to throw out at the other end of that process. So any other contributions on that subject before I go to the next question? No? Okay, so the next question actually is around family businesses, and it's making the point that diverse thinking is often limited, obviously, by the collective power of family board members. Do the panel have any examples of shifting the thinking within family businesses? I don't know if anybody has any specific point to come in on there. Talita, yeah?
I don't have it specifically for a family business, but I can tell you what a business has done that had limited diversity on its board. It's within its strategic process, it invited other companies of similar sizes who were thinking differently and who were more advanced in the areas that they wanted to strategically advance, and asked them to come and have a conversation with the board around what they were doing, how they were doing it, why did they believe it made them successful. And it's to bring that outside in thinking into your board. So what very often happens is that boards are extremely insular and they think about their situation and not really think about how can we apply different thoughts from other industries to what we do. And I think then it's really good to get some of that outside in thinking, and through that strategic process where one has someone presenting and telling the story and really trying to lay it as open as you possibly can.
Yeah, and again, to get that external input there, I know many of us on this panel are and have had non-exec roles, and I think it came up in one of the chats earlier that I saw come through, was the importance of having non-exec input onto these family boards. I know that was the first step that we made as a business going back about 7 or 8 years ago now, and the impact was significant. To others in the room, Charlotte and Jennifer,
I'm happy to have come in on that.
Yeah.
So over the years, I've served on a number of family-owned businesses. I'm currently serving on 2, which is NTI in Ireland and Langeroog Construction. And I enjoy family businesses. You generally have strong personalities in the room. They have built fantastic businesses over years doing things in a certain way. But my experience is also that they are humble in terms of they don't take for granted that everything has been achieved just because they are fantastic, top at everything, right? They listen to other people. And I think when you have conversations and get to know the families and what's behind them, and they trust that you are there for the best of their business, not for the best of your own profile, then you get another level of trust, and the conversations you can have can impact the thinking of the family as well then, as long as it comes from a point of genuinely wanting to help the business prosper and the family prosper in the right kind of ways, taking into account the broader values that their business brings to society and the environment.
Thanks, Charlotte. Anything to add on there, Jennifer? I know you have some NED positions as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'd add would be in order for any family business or really any private business to change, they have to understand what it is that they're missing. So if you're dealing with insularity on your board, it's important to bring the perspective of you know, what other boards are doing, what other opportunities there might be, what innovations they might be missing out on. So you have to build that expectation, you have to build that need for a change, Otherwise, listening to disparate voices is not going to go anywhere. If we only speak in the abstract, then we're not going to win folks over who are set in thinking in a particular way.
I agree on that, and I would say what often happens, the driver is often that they're seeking external capital, right? So when they're seeking external capital and want to do an IPO or take in private equity or whatever, then there is a driver. There always has to be a driver for change. But I think those are the situations where I see that then family businesses are very happy to listen to someone who is specialized in getting companies ready to take external investments.
Yeah, fantastic. That's brilliant. Conscious of time, we are wrapping up. Before we go to our Q&A, I will do one completely direct plug for the Chartered Directorship Programme, and you said it there, Jennifer. Sometimes it's you're not aware of what you need until it's actually pointed out, and I can certainly say that was the case for me going through the Directorship Programme. When you actually sit that element of what board diversity delivers, bear with me, somebody's ringing my doorbell, if you can hear that in the background.
Nice doorbell.
Sorry. It was bound to happen, wasn't it, to one of us? Yes, obviously we weren't aware of what that benefit would be until it was actually pointed out to us. So if you haven't been through the programme, then get yourself enlisted. So Emma, I will hand back over to you for the Q&A. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl, Talita, Jennifer, Susie, Charlotte. Thank you. Now, for anyone who joined us midway through and hasn't been through the first breakout session, we're actually going to do another breakout session now. So you will shortly be transported into a breakout room. We have pre-assigned your chairs again, and they will facilitate a discussion around your key takeaways from Charlotte's keynote, and then obviously into the panel discussion on D&I. So we're going to give you 15 minutes. It'll be a slightly larger group that you'll be meeting with, but still a rich discussion. We'll rejoin in 15 minutes, and it will literally be a quick fire 60 seconds sort of plenary discussion before we close up. Excellent. So over to the team to put us in our breakout sessions. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. As we did before, we're going to go to each group in turn and ask each chair to list the top takeaways from their discussion. The challenge is you have 1 minute max. So I'm going to start with Rochelle, please.
Hi, Emma. Thank you.
Hi, Rochelle.
And thanks to the team, to our team. Our top points are diversity is a much broader issue than most people have historically aligned it with. It's more than gender. It is, there's agreement around mindset, skill set, experience that someone brings into the room. And the real importance are the points of view. Someone can bring a new point of view into the room. Inclusion is the other side of the conversation. And so it's really important that those induction programs take into consideration where the gaps might be for new directors to come into the boardroom and participate fluently with the language and the understanding of the business. That's their homework ahead of time, but it's the board's role, and it's the board's role to ensure that induction takes place and all new members feel comfortable. The strong chair. And the other piece around finding diverse directors, there's a plug for whether the IoD actually offers access to prospective nets for organizations, and if that is an opportunity, I think it should be shared to the network of branches. But beyond utilizing the IoD, boards have an opportunity, chairs have an opportunity to also look at their stakeholder groups to determine which are ideal to have representation in the boardroom.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Robert Varley, please.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, Okay, very quickly, we had a good conversation about how this works out in small companies, family-owned companies, often where there are no non-execs, where sometimes opinions are harder to change, and where with a smaller number, it's just more difficult to get the right diversity, and there getting an NED can be a real game changer. We talked about the challenge if you've been making products that younger people don't want, and how we're going to have to bring in a more diverse thinking in order to recognize what young people are asking for in terms of products, and shift our companies accordingly. And lastly, we talked about how we get diversity coming up through the organization to executive leadership, where often, although we get a good diverse intake at the bottom of the organization, by the time you get to the top, there are very few women or other diversities available to promote into board positions. And how do we change that through the organization in terms of managing the talent pipeline? And that's 55 seconds.
Thank you, Robert. Deborah Morton-Dare, please.
I think the diversity of thought was absolutely the theme of ours. The need for younger people on boards to give that challenge to older people's thinking. I think that Jane brought up the great point about how technology has been really amazing in helping with disability and inclusive aspects. I think that we all agree quotas, if they have to be used, because why are we still having this conversation? Clearly they do. They need to be meaningful. And Jennifer was bringing up some points about the explicit quotas in California. But if you're going to use them, they've got to be meaningful, and there's got to be real emphasis from the board to make this work and go out and find people. I'm sure that was less than a minute too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. Janos, please. Janos Mikopoulos.
Who lost 2 minutes to unmute himself. We trying to do some differentiation between the large corporates and the family businesses. Very much like Deborah's group, diversity of thought, it was the key topic of conversation as an example of inclusive leadership. We also talk about the non-visible aspects, particularly cognitive diversity. We talked EQ bigger than IQ, emotional skills as opposed to leadership skills. We talked about what's missing. And here is a good recommendation, Emma, when we talk about the IoD's matrix of competencies, perhaps to start including some diversity elements into the skills and experiences that a director should have. We talked about the biases, particularly in our decision making. And last but not least, a new term, we talked about how to, with quotas, but we talked about blind shifting as a technique to ensure that the boards are blind, the selection committees, the nomination blind to the backgrounds, etc. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Janos. Andy Leask, please. Andy.
Thank you, Emma. We talked mainly about the barriers to achieving the blend of directors on the board, how we end up with making the boards in our own image, about the recruitment process, pigeonholing, how we describe the role in the recruitment process, the fear of boards getting it wrong in the recruitment process and recrimination. And it's safer in some ways to go for somebody who's got all the qualifications, all the experience, rather than take a risk. I think that covers it pretty well.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Andy. Charles Kingsmill, please.
Thank you. So great discussion. Headline, diversity doesn't have to be difficult, but you do have to be prepared to hire people who don't fit in. Technology can help here because location may not matter as much as it did. You may be able to hire differently abled people. Technology can allow all sorts of people to come to the workforce. So there's good news to be had there. Yes, now advertising for roles. We talked a bit earlier about how recruitment can be a block, and we should try to review our advertising to see whether or not we're putting people off. We had a terrific example about hiring bus drivers, and when you invite people along to drive a bus around a field for a day, then you get all sorts of people who would never think about applying for the job. So change the way we advertise jobs. Final point, psychological safety. It's so important for the chair particularly to create the environment in which people can speak. That requires patience. So pause, reflect on what people are saying, discuss it fully. It takes more time, but you get much, much more done, and it can be a lot more fun. That's it.
Thank you, Charles. William, English CBE, please.
Thank you. I have 3 points, Emma, from our excellent team, and they are clarity of strategic position, diversity type, and chair and board leadership decision making. Clarity of position from a strategic point of view, understanding the purpose of the company and what it does, why it's there, and then having a strategy that can be pinned and opined against with strategic goals that need to be that diverse group need to enable and take forward. Point number 1. Point number 2, the diversity type, a desire not to reach for quotas, but to reach out and be an outward facing organization, and then getting more diverse board members. And lastly, the way that the board and the chair are able to act, and 3 points within. First, to accept diversity. I believe that all of us probably do that already, but then to be able to accommodate change and the thoughts that come from that. And lastly, how the chair brings all that diverse thinking together to enable strategic, common strategic goals that enable the move across the strategic gap to the vision. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you, William. Mary Campbell, please.
Hi, thanks, Emma. Yeah, great discussion in our group. Again, headlines, demands on the skill of the chair, absolutely. Psychological safety point, absolutely. Behavioral psychology course, someone's looking for one day, behavioral psychology, creating that safe environment, because there's no point in having diversity if people can't speak. Therefore, we need to be able to hear and challenge. To look at diversity in terms of different industries and different education backgrounds. So because we look different doesn't mean we are. A plea to think about young, old and old, young. So again, diversity of thought. Shout out for Matthew Said's work. Really interesting conversation in our group about the multicultural dimensions. So again, you know, people who look the same, but come from very different cultural backgrounds, Canadian or American or Nigerian or whatever, how we take all of that into account. And indeed how managing the pandemic, and I've seen from clients how managing the pandemic with different cultural messaging, you know, coronavirus is a fake, you know, kind of messaging at the moment, to what we have in Europe with the messaging for the same workforce. And then a final comment from ours that hasn't been picked up in some of the other courses yet is the understanding that when we take diversity, we may well have people in very different family situations, diversity of family situations. So particularly during lockdown, the demands that are made on people when we're sitting on boards, the demands that we're making of people sitting at home, and understanding that there are very, very different pressures there. And because someone looks fine, that doesn't mean to say that they are fine. So, you know, diversity, but if we take diversity, we have 1, we've got to respect it. 2, we've got to give it space to air its views. And 3, we have got to find a way of bringing it all together again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much, and to your group. So we have 2 more. We've got Clive, and then we'll finish up with Norman and then go to Dr. Roger Barker for closing remarks. Clive, to you.
Yeah, so first of all, we talked about the case for diversity, and particularly in those companies that were smaller or perhaps in a different jurisdiction or country. And I think we felt that we really had to sell it from a point of what are they missing out on, rather than just it's the right thing to do. So it's make it practical what the benefit is for the company. Secondly, once the decision, if you like, to go for a more diverse board was made, we have to be careful with job descriptions, because quite often the devil's in the detail, and we might miss out on good candidates just through almost indirect discrimination there. I think the third point we said is, even though people may have a place on the board, that doesn't mean to say they're active board members and whether the board is listening. So almost the inclusion element was just as important as actually the board makeup. So whether that's through induction, training, chairman observation, etc., making it a truly diverse and active board was the key point. And I guess the fourth and final one, we talked about decision making, and yes, it is more difficult, but actually it makes for a richer and more valuable discussion and better board outcome and better company outcome as a consequence. So it's worth the effort.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Clive. And finally, Norman, to finish up.
Thanks, Emma. I'll avoid repetition because a lot has been covered already. So I just want to say 3 brief things.
Thank you.
And quotes really from people from the excellent group that I was in. So the first was from one of the group members: always recruit people who will challenge you.
Yeah, brilliant.
And second is it's more fun with different people from different backgrounds. Much more fun to work with, and I can back that up completely because I've worked in a very diverse organisation. And then the third one is about just let's get rid of all this, especially at the board level, of sector experience. You have to have sector experience to do this, but to fulfil this role. Yes, if there's some very strong technical aspect of it, but that frankly is a great barrier to diversity as well. So that's our 3 brief points.
Thank you, Norman, and thank you, everyone. I mean, brilliant, and again, really rich discussion and points that have come out from our second panel. So thank you again. I'm actually going to hand over now to Dr. Roger Barker, who's our Director of Policy and Governance. I'm sure you all know Roger, and he's going to helpfully wrap up today's fantastic summit. Just a reminder, please, to complete the evaluation form. The team have actually posted that in the chat now. Your feedback is absolutely critical to us. We're always wanting to do things, better and make them relevant. Yeah, we'd welcome your time to complete that. But yes, over to Roger. Thank you very much.
Emma, thank you so much. And it sounds like you've had an absolutely fascinating discussion this afternoon. I'm in absolutely no doubt that these 2 topics of sustainability and diversity and inclusion are core topics for the director of the future. And they're topics which are really moving now, I think, at lightning speed. I mean, some may say that they've spent a lot of time not moving fast enough, but it seems almost on a day-to-day basis there are developments in both areas. I mean, just this month, for example, on the sustainability front, we've had the announcement of the first ever green bond by the UK Chancellor. We've had the announcement that all companies above a certain size will adopt a common approach to climate change reporting by 2025. And there's a real discussion out there going on about how when we come out of this COVID crisis, how do we build back in a green way? That's seen as being an essential part of the recovery. And on the diversity and inclusion side, I mean, that also, I think, is evolving very rapidly. There have been some big developments on incorporating gender diversity into boards in Germany just in the last few days. And I think, for me, that the most fascinating aspect of that discussion is really how unconscious elements affect our ability to deliver diversity and inclusion. And often it's those unconscious barriers which we're not even really aware of, that really are the most challenging, I think, to overcome going forward. I mean, when it comes, though, to Chartered Director, which is what this day is all about, I mean, I'm in no doubt there also that not only does the IoD need Chartered Director, but the world needs Chartered Director more than ever. I mean, it makes such a compelling case, I think, to have a standardized director gold standard qualification, just as you have a common standard for climate change reporting being introduced. the case for a common, consistent standard of qualification for directors is as strong as ever. And I think, you know, it's really beholden on all of us, both at the IoD and the entire Chartered Director community, to think of ways in which we can take forward Chartered Director to the next level. Hopefully as soon as possible, but certainly in the next year. And we're going to be working very hard to do that. In terms now of this conference, there's been a link to a feedback form which has been posted in the Q&A. And we do ask you if you could fill that in. That will also enable you to claim participation in this conference as part of your CPD fulfillment. So we do encourage you to do that. The final thing I would say to everyone involved in this conference is thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you to all of the organisers. I know there have been many people involved in organising this conference from the regions of the IoD and also centrally as well. It's been a terrific effort, and I really do hope that you've enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to engaging with you on Chartered Director in the year ahead. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Roger. And yeah, I mean, we're 5 minutes over. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful. I think at one point we had about 170 participants, so that's brilliant. And as John said at the beginning, hopefully this will become a set event. And you know, there's so much more that we want to do around this to champion Chartered, to provide more CPD to our Chartered Directors and our member community. So thank you for participating, to our panelists, to our chairs, and also the team behind this. There's so many to name, but they've been phenomenal. So thank you very much, and do give us your feedback, and stay in touch, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.